Hola, Sai, Wisdom of the Way. I have a question for you. Do you really know yourself? Do you really know who you are? And how? How do you do that? Like, what is that to you? And this is something that's really been alive for me in these days, and I've been sitting with, contemplating on, and that I'd like to explore. Because what I see is that I know myself through my lived experiences, through what's happening in my world, in my life, and what's happening in my inner experience, not just what's happening out there and what's happening around me or to me, but what's happening inside and through. Yeah, and so this is something I'd really like to share with you today, and also some of those ways that, particularly one way that I've found that's been really useful these days in getting to know myself in a better way. So if you'd like to join me for a mate, mm, I'm back here in the couch, in the field, and yeah, I really love this. I'm really enjoying these moments of being able to sit down and contemplate and go within and to share, and if it's helpful for you or useful or interesting, then great. Um, so how do we get to know ourselves? We can understand why it's valuable. Knowing ourselves is, well, that's another topic, completely different, but it's an incredibly valuable, incredibly invaluable experience when we know ourselves better, to be able to live this experience, navigate different experiences of life. But how do we do it? How do you do it? I'd love to know. Let me know. Um, some things that are very clear for me that are useful practices. One's meditation. Meditation is a very simple practice, and it's meant to be simple. And essentially, there's just a couple of things going on. One is that we're observing our mind, or we have a particular practice, we're focused on something, but we're also observing what comes up in our consciousness, in our awareness. And we're accepting that. We're accepting that that thought or that experience or that feeling is arising. So observation and acceptance. And I think this is a really fundamental aspect of just getting to know ourselves, not with the need to change or to be something else. Yeah. So meditation, writing is another great, powerful tool. And it's something I'd like to share more on. I mean, there's other ways of doing this, through facilitation, through therapy, through particular inner work, which is also really valuable in a way of getting to know ourselves. But what's been really alive in me these days is is the reflection through writing, and the power of that. And so I'd like to speak about that process, and I mean, we can call it conscious journaling or connected writing or some free flow reflection. There's many ways to do it, and I'd like to share with you what's been working, what's been really valuable for me in these days, and it's a powerful practice, and it's really simple, which is often like most powerful practices, most useful practices. They're simple. They should be. So what I've been doing is that I've been supporting myself to get in the state, in a right state. Yeah, that might be grounding, sitting down, being in nature, having a moment, connecting with my breath, maybe even visualizing, connecting, grounding my body, doing some breath work or Kriya practices, some other things that we've shared here. But getting in a receptive state, and then connecting with a deeper part within myself. There's many ways to do this, and maybe you're familiar with ways, or some ways are just more accessible for you, feel more available. Whether it's connecting, literally asking for your higher self, to connect with your higher self, to be guided, to, if there's a particular connection you feel in life with something else, life, spirit, um, if you're connected with a religion, something of a higher force that's inviting us to go deeper within, to a place beyond just our mind. Yeah. And so these experiences, they're not so much really just, a Dear Diary account of what happened, but actually like being able to go in and in that state also ask for guidance, ask for assistance, for help with being able to understand something in a deeper way. And again, in a way that feels relevant and accessible for you. And then being able just to be there without the need to even write, to write well, or to write something impressive, or to write a lot, allowing the space to be there and allowing whatever arises in the space, however it comes. Maybe they're not words, maybe it's a drawing, maybe it's a different type of expression. It could be an audio. But the point is there's a lot of flexibility in the way we can do these things. But it doesn't need to look like anything. It doesn't need to be a result. It doesn't need to be something that's executed in a really impressive way. Yeah, that it's just an ability to listen, deeply, deeply listening. And I think this is what it is, deep listening. To be able to hear from another place, to be able to connect with another place. And this has been so powerful for me in these days, as I've met a few challenges in these days and been able to make some space. And that's the other thing, that there needs to be some space, some time to be able to do it. So it needs to be an appropriate time to do it. Sure, maybe on the way to work, I'm sitting on the train, I can reflect. Absolutely, I can write. But there's something so powerful about getting into a particular state or a particular space with a particular, could be ritual, maybe a mate. I know there's some people who, that's what they do after they meditate. They make a mate and they sit down and they have their book and do some reflection. Yeah. So it's going to be unique to you, but it's really powerful. And I think what's really interesting is a couple of things. What we see, what we feel, what arises, maybe the feeling that I have, the emotion that I have. But it's not just about talking about emotion, it's about understanding where things come from, where and why I respond to life in a particular way, why I live a particular experience, where that conditioning or where that way of thinking comes from, why I felt triggered, for example, why I felt hurt, or where I didn't. I'll give you an example. I didn't feel seen with something in a particular experience, and there was a pain from it. But why was that an issue? Now, remembering there's not good or bad, we approach this from curiosity, and I think that's the from a place that's neutral, where we're using this because we want to know ourselves, not because I want to be perfect. Yeah, there's a part of me that wants to be perfect, that wants to be great at things, that wants to be liked. But it's beyond that, and that's why I think it's really important that we can get in that state to be able to do it. You know, I'll share a little story that was powerful, and it happened on an adventure and in the most unlikely situation. And it happened, well, I I had to I was at an airport, and I couldn't board a flight, and I needed uh, to be able to board the flight, I needed to have an exit ticket of a country from India. And so I had 10 minutes to organize something, and I felt, okay, I'd love to go to Israel. You know, it's been calling me. So I booked a ticket, and I ended up there, and I started walking on the Shvil Israel. Yeah, it's like like a Camino, it's a long trail that goes through all of the country. Incredible experience. But what happened when I arrived there was the next day the country closed. It was the start of COVID. And I started walking and in the desert in the south, just with the tent and not too many other things. And I arrived to this kibbutz, this community called Neotz Madar. And this is another story completely. But basically, why I'm telling and sharing this story, because when I arrived there, the next day the kibbutz closed. So I could have left, but no one could enter after this time. So what life gifted me was 4 months of this incredible experience that I wouldn't have chosen consciously at that time because I had another plan, but life gave me this gift. And while we were there, they have many different interesting aspects to the communal living, which has existed for, I think, 40 years. Incredible experience, incredible teachers and practices there for another day. But one of the study groups in the meetings that everyone would, the intention of the place was really as a school, as a place of an experience of self-learning, of self-observation, and this would be explored through life, through the work, through the living situations, through anything. And so there were study groups that would meet each week. You meet in an evening, maybe around a fire, and there might be a particular theme, and you'd explore that theme, and they would ask people to write a report. It was called a doch. This was a report of something in their life, what was alive in their life. And they would ask to write it because there's a particular power and expression that happens when we communicate. And maybe you can relate to this, that when we give words to something, so I might have a thought, but then I come and sit here and I give words to it, then it sometimes brings a different clarity or a different invitation or a different understanding, or you might see that in a conversation with someone. Well, also the same when we write. When we write something, then I started to realize this because I wasn't a great writer. I wasn't doing it and I wasn't really loving it. And it wasn't my natural thing. But as I started to write, I started to learn a lot more about myself. And in this report might be a particular theme that we were focusing on, something that was, that was a challenge or something that I was seeing about myself in that moment. But being able to report or write from the place of the reporter, which I guess we would say is like the place of the observer, that we're able to get some space from the experience and observe what of our experience is, what's happening. Not just, so firstly, what happened, what was the actual report, but then understanding that report, like why I had this experience in the way that I had this experience. It was challenging. I'll definitely be honest about that. It was really challenging, but it was really enlivening. Something came alive and it became more natural. And I need to keep remembering this because the more that I'm able to be even come and sit here, and sometimes this is a little bit, I feel a bit exposed, that's for sure. Talking to a camera or sharing this with you, the world, or with someone who I haven't met, or I don't necessarily feel that trust or connection. So it's challenging. This is part of my practice at this moment. But there's something also enlivening about it because it's really alive. I'm exploring something new in this. So, yeah, I've really found that this is a powerful practice around getting to know myself. And when it becomes more normal, then the fear that I have, becomes a bit less because it becomes practiced. It becomes exposed, but, in ways that can be safe. So, in this theme of getting to know myself, getting to know ourselves and how, I feel like it's a really important that it's so powerful in this process of getting to know ourselves and how we can do that. And firstly, that's an invitation to observe, to reflect, to see something. And what that allows and what that brings is truth. There's a greater understanding of truth or honesty in that honesty, there's a greater possibility and invitation of acceptance, of understanding this is my experience at the moment. This is what I'm living. And when there's a greater level of acceptance in our experience, there's a greater experience of peace. A little bit more peace is there. A little bit more space in the exhalation. And when there's more peace, then there's a greater place where and capacity from where I can adapt to the life, to the situation, the experience of the moment. Maybe there's a challenge. There's a greater possibility of adaptability. And this is also what our practices are doing, especially our meditation, when it's really, okay, we're enlivening our ability to be able to observe, to see what is, and to accept what we're seeing. And from that place comes a greater responsiveness and adaptability. And it's powerful, and it happens in the smallest of moments. And it's not always comfortable. Like sometimes sitting here. So thanks for your presence today, for being able to share and sit and contemplate. And yeah, I'd be interested to know, how do you get to know yourself? How do you really get to know yourself? Many blessings for the inner and the outer journey.